For the previous video, we talked about while loops, and in this particular tutorial, our main focus will be for loops in Python. So a for loop is used for iterating over a sequence, that is either a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set of a string, a set or a string rather. So this is less like the for keyword in other programming languages, and works more like an iterator method as found in other OOP languages. So with a for loop, we can execute a set of statements, each once for each item in a list, so, such as a tuple, a set, etc., etc. So if I was to write a list, let's say fruits. Let's say apple. Now, for x in fruits, I could say print and when you run that, obviously you get apple, banana, cherry, because we printed each fruit in a fruit list, right? So the for loop does not require an indexing variable to set beforehand. Alright, so we don't need to set an indexing variable like we did with a while loop. Now let's looping through a string. Like, even strings are iterable objects, so they contain a sequence of characters. So you could say, instead of looping through fruits, I can just say loop for x. Say you could say loop for x in a word, like let's say banana, right? And that will print each individual letter, B, A, N, A, and A. Right, banana. I had to think twice. I spelled banana. Okay, so the break statement. Now, with a break statement, we can stop the loop before it has looped through all the items. So let's say we can say exit the loop when x is banana. So we can say, let's just go back with our previous example and have all the different fruits in that item, and say for x in fruits, print x. Now we can say if x is equal to banana, break. So that essentially exits the loop when x hits the banana. And you see there, apple, banana, and the loop broke. Okay, we break the statement. Or we could just say print for x, and just get rid of the print for x. And when you run that, the loop exits when x is banana, but this time the break comes before the print. Okay, so the break came before the print in this particular instance, but that is not quite right. So that's more like it. So we get apple instead of banana, because as is, so if the loop exited with x is banana, but this time the break comes before the print, where if we were to put the print before the break, we would get apple and banana. But this time we only get apple because the break came before the print, right? Now another thing we could use is the continue statement. So with the continue statement, we can stop the current iteration in the loop and continue with the next. So we could say for x in fruits, if x is banana, instead of breaking it, we say continue. And obviously we can sort of tell what the results will be. And it should be apple break, doesn't display banana, but jumps onto cherry. Okay, so it's kind of a given in this instance. Now to loop through a set of code, the specified number of times we can use the range function. So the range function returns a sequence of numbers starting from 0 by default and incrementing by 1. That's also by default, and ends at a specified number. So we could say for x in range 6, could say print x, and that prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice that the range function returns a sequence of numbers starting at 0 by default and incrementing by 1 by default, and ends at a specified number. So we said end at 6, but it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 5, but it ended at 6. Right. If I was to say 7, obviously would get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but not 7 included. So the logic there is obvious. Now the range function defaults to 0 as a starting value. However, it is possible to specify the starting value by adding a parameter. So I could say, instead of starting at 0 by default, let's start at 1 by default, and we should get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it is possible to specify the starting value by just adding a parameter, and 1 was the parameter that we added. So which means that from which values from 2 to 6, but not including from 1 to 7, but not including 7. All right, so we added a starting parameter there. And also the range function defaults to increments. The range function defaults to increment the sequence by 1. However, it is possible to specify the increment value by adding a third parameter. So we could say 1 to 7, and our third parameter would be, let's say, 3. Okay, so the increment, the sequence, we could increment, let's just make it a bigger number. Let's say 22. So what are we saying here? So we're incrementing the sequence by 2. And it defaults to 1. Okay, how will it look like? So it's going to look like 1, increment 2, 3, increment 2, 5, increment 2, 7, increment 2, 9, increment 2, 11, increment 2, 13, increment 2, 15, increment 2, 17, increment 2, 19. So you get the logic there. So by default we start at 1, and the range is up to 20, so that's the parameter, but incrementing that by 2. So you can toy around with range, the range function, which is a very cool, useful function to use later on. Now, the else keyword in a for loop specifies a number of block of code to be executed when the loop is finished. So we could say in a range, this particular range, let's give it a range of 7. We could say once that's done, else print. Yeah, that's it. Done. And obviously once the parameters are met, you get that return. That's it, done. Okay, so the else block will not be executed if the loop is stopped by a break. So if I was to put a break here, let's say so let's say 0, 1, 2, 3, and then we put a break after 4. What happens? So the loop was broken at 4. That's it. So that means else will not be included because we broke the loop at 4. Okay. Another thing that we could do is we can nest a loop inside a loop. So we could say, let's have 2 lists. An adjective here, and a bunch of fruits. Actually, I think it would be much easier. Yep. Alright, so we have, let's just add an adjective here and a bunch of items. So let's say red, big, tasty, whatever. So we could say X in fruits, so for X in adjective and for Y in fruits. So what have we done here? Let's just get a print. So we've nested these 2 items. So we go red apple, red banana, red cherry, big apple, big banana, big cherry, tasty apple, tasty banana, tasty cherry. So we nested. This is what's called a nested loop. So a nested loop is a loop inside a loop, right? So the inner loop will be executed one time for each iteration of the outer loop. Inner loop, iteration, outer loop. Inner loop, iteration, outer loop. Inner loop, iteration, outer loop. So red apple, red banana, red cherry, big apple, big banana, big cherry, tasty apple, tasty banana, tasty cherry. So that is, for each iteration, we are executing the inner loop with the outer loop for each iteration of the initial list. Okay, so that is how you nest a loop, for example. And for for loops cannot be empty, but if for some reason you have a for loop with no content, you can put in the past statement to avoid getting an error. So I could say, if I have a bunch of for loops here, and if that was to remain empty, I'm already getting an error there, because that cannot be empty. If I was trying to run that, I'd get, hey, expected, there's an indentation error, because something is expected, right? But if I was to say pass, see, nothing happens. So the for loop can never be left empty. If you're reading through a line of code and you're getting an error because the for loop there's nothing in there for whatever reason, just put in the pass statement and that should fix your code. So that's an example, it's a brief example of how you can work with for loops in Python. And obviously it's always good to keep in mind the differences between the while and the for loops. It quite often is to do with the fact that a for loop is, you don't have to use I think that, yeah, it's usually used for executing a set of statements, such as like a list or a tuple, a set, etc. But I think the main difference you could say is that the for loop does not require an indexing variable to be set beforehand, like we did with the while loop. So that's a good sort of main difference to keep in mind. Okay, that's it from me for this particular video. We'll be looking at other things later. But thank you very much.